Dude, well, the rest of Romans 13:1, there's a couple more verses that really show what God believes or God believes is important for a governing authority to do. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you'll receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. There's a lot here. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, he's going to unpack here in verse 6. For because of this, you also pay taxes. Man, that's tough.
Mm-hmm.
For the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them,
Mm-hmm.
taxes to whom taxes are owed, all of that. Honor to whom honor is owed. That is a very challenging passage for me.
Yeah. I don't want to
Um,
pay taxes.
very, yeah.
I don't trust
Well,
the people that take my taxes. That they'll use it on
I th-
anything but their own like wallets.
I think what you saw in that passage though is that God's intention for government was to promote good
Mm-hmm.
and to punish evil,
Yeah.
as He would do. And so I think if you are looking at everything in light of the entirety of Scripture, when a government ceases to do that, do we not have a responsibility to do something about it? And so that would be the one side of what someone would say as an American. Yes, I have every right to do something about a government that ceases to be what God has it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I also don't think that what we're going through right now is analogous to what you were saying earlier with Nazi Germany and well, what people are having to go through when they're having to hide Jews and lie about having Jews in their house because they didn't want them to be slaughtered.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think the point. I think part of that is, and Solzhenitsyn made this point, is don't let it get to that point. And well, how do you do that? Well, you tell the truth at all times because he tracked the pattern, and of course, because we're not dealing with warlords anymore, really, like guys who come in and invade and just take over. And sometimes that happens, of course, in other countries. It may happen here for all I know, but usually the tyrants like we see now come into power through lies and through entire countries refusing to tell the truth. And, stuff like we see right now happening in our country. You know, people being afraid to say what's
yeah,
true.
I mean, I think what's so challenging, I hate to keep going back to this, but that Romans 13 passage
Yeah.
was written to people who were under Caesar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who, within a generation, there'd be a Caesar who they thought was the Antichrist and who met all the markings
Yes.
of it. And these
Yeah.
teachings still applied. There's no such thing as a
So
Christian revolution.
yeah, it's submission.
Yeah.
That's what we see in that passage of scripture. It's submission. I think that where the rubber meets the road is where things go against God's law.
Mm-hmm.
I think if something is sufficient, like you were saying this earlier, if something is sufficiently against God's law, um, my submission and reverence has to ultimately be to the God who is the ultimate supreme governor above a government entity. And I think that's where we're at. I think that's what we're saying here is that there's never going to be a perfect system of government. There's never going to be a perfect nation until Jesus comes back himself.